Hi, my name is Daintry and I am Simply Earth's Ambassador for Anti-Trafficking. This month I had the honor of interviewing Becky Rasmussen, who's the director of Call to Freedom. And I just started the interview by asking her what has changed in the last year. It's been a year since we last interviewed Becky, and so I just wanted to hear what was new. And there's so many things that are new. So I'm going to share with you some of those things. The first one is that Call to Freedom is expanding their housing. They right now house 7 women in what they call Marissa's Project. They have efficiency apartments, which are perfect for these women. However, a lot of times these survivors have children that they would like living with them, and so efficiency apartments are not the best option for living with children. And so it's been a good, Becky said it's been a good place to start and to do it well, but now they're realizing they do have the capacity to expand. And so there is a company that has come to them and said, we want to do a housing project. And this housing project is a $2 million project, and they've asked that Call to Freedom will raise a chunk of the money, and then they'll apply for the rest of the monies through the state, and this company will build the property for them, and the property will end up having 12 units. There'll be 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. And so not only will this be an awesome opportunity for these survivors to have their children living with them, but it also creates this community dynamic. And Becky shared with me that some of the survivors that have been gone through a lot of healing and are now ready to mentor other survivors would step in and mentor some of those living in the housing complex as well. So it would be a cool, unique family dynamic. And they're looking at this would take place in 2020. The second thing that she shared with me that's changed in the last year is that the Call to Freedom coordinates the East River Human Trafficking Task Force, and these committees are formed, and they're looking at what our community is doing, what are they seeing, and how can we better equip them. So this is all in the context of trafficking. She talked a lot about having the right procedures and responses in place when a trafficking victim comes forward or is identified. And so she talked about that sometimes there's youths who are being trafficked by their own family members, and in order to have enough evidence, you have to have a handful of evidence that proves that there's trafficking happening in the home. And if you're unable to prove it, then that youth is put back in their home in an unsafe situation. So the task force will be multi-layered. There's different committees, and they'll be each working in their own areas. However, the task force's goal is that they would do education prevention, so educating people on what are signs to look for, what are ways to prevent trafficking situations or potential trafficking situations, but also what are our responses when we identify, or how do we identify victims of trafficking, and what are our responses when someone is identified. So that means working with shelters and addiction centers and emergency shelters and law enforcement and helping them ask appropriate and better questions. And then what happens when a victim of trafficking comes forward, what's supposed to happen next. So the task force will go into a few pilot communities starting in the middle of 2019. They'll launch these pilot communities, and so they're going into communities that already have an infrastructure built. So maybe they already have domestic violence shelters functioning and capable, and so they're placing in some elements that are missing. So instead of saying, okay, we've identified a survivor of trafficking, we need to send them over to this organization who works with survivors of trafficking. Instead, bringing people on staff that can help and that can connect the survivors to the things that they need. So that might look like, in a domestic violence shelter, having a case manager on staff that can meet with that survivor of trafficking, knows the procedures and protocols, knows how to help, and so it's part of what's built, and not sending them on to another thing and another thing and another thing. The last thing is that she said that collaboration has become super important, is key for them. They've actually expanded also into labor trafficking. So identifying this in our city here in Sioux Falls and addressing it, and collaborating with organizations who are already have their feet in and already are in the door and working on this issue, assessing work conditions, and possibly adding like a bilingual part-time employee to Call to Freedom staff. She said the questions we're asking are, where are the gaps in the laws that are holding these people vulnerable, and developing responses to when they identify somebody who's a victim of labor trafficking. Becky's knowledge of the legal system is vast, and she knows so much, and she's continually discovering more. Where are there missing pieces, and where are there gaps, and what needs to happen, and who do I contact? And so when she says collaboration is huge, I actually really understood that when I was speaking with her, how much she relies on many different people and many different organizations and systems that are already in place. If I had a takeaway from our conversation, it would be that the question she is asking over and over again is, how do we keep survivors of trafficking safe if they come forward? And this is still a process. A lot of times there's so many different situations, and if the survivors have drug addiction, or if they have felonies because their pimp is making them do illegal activities to as well as they're being trafficked, and there's just so many different pieces to the puzzle, and the web is so big. And Becky and I were talking about just the web of human trafficking, and she said, pornography is a huge contributor to this huge web, and you start having people with sex addictions, and because pornography is so accessible, it becomes something that it's not satisfying enough. So the next step is to purchase, and so there's a lot of brokenness too in that side of it, of the Johns, the guys buying, or the people buying, I should say. There's brokenness in the pimp, the person selling these women, and somewhere along the way that pimp is now believing that what they're doing is okay, and so there's brokenness there, and there's brokenness for these for the victims of trafficking. Maybe they were vulnerable, maybe it was their own family, maybe they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Like the web of brokenness is big. And so Becky talked about how prayer is the most significant thing. I asked her what can people do? How can we get involved? And she said prayer is the biggest thing that you can do. Obviously, a huge part of it is getting hands on the ground, people to help, people to volunteer. But a huge part for Call to Freedom is being in prayer, because only God can do an act this big. She said that some of the pimps and people that the stories that she's heard from survivors, they're so horrendous that it's only an act of God that could transform the hearts of the perpetrators and the ones buying. And so the Call to Freedom is eager for people to partner with them in prayer and to see transformation for all of these pieces of the web, all of the legal system, to the aftercare, to the addiction centers, to the Johns and the pimps, just everyone who's involved. Prayer is a huge piece of seeing victory. She also said that if you're in the area, she has an awesome volunteer coordinator who has been with Call to Freedom for a long time, and she said there is a process. You have to fill out an application online, And then the volunteer coordinator will meet with you and kind of talk to you. What are you passionate about? Where would you fit? And she said they've grown their programs and expanded things depending on people's passions and where they're gifted. And they have a security team that goes with them of people that have been in those kind of situations before. What's the word I'm looking for? Former bodyguards and stuff like that. So wherever your gifting lies, wherever your passion lies, Call to Freedom really wants to partner with your giftings and passions and put you in a place that would not only be good for you, but also for the survivors or for what Call to Freedom is in need of. There's a lot of volunteer opportunities as far as even being part of a prayer team, helping with clothing and mentoring. They have nurses that they need if a survivor comes in and needs medical care, someone to partner with and that knows what questions to ask and what things are maybe more sensitive topics. So there's so many ways to partner with them. Obviously, financially is a huge one. For most of these organizations that I sit down with, their financial needs are always there. And finally, they're having Call to Freedom is having a night of worship. It's a benefit concert. The proceeds from the night will go towards Marissa's project, which is Call to Freedom's current housing project. And the night of worship will be hosted by a team of artists from Bethel Church in Redding, California. And so if you're in the area, you can go to their Facebook page and check that out. There's a link there. So all that to say, we are really thankful for all that Call to Freedom is doing, and I was honored to have time with Becky and to hear about all of the new things. Her passion for what she's doing and her passion for the Lord are contagious. And so thank you for each member of Call to Freedom. Thank you for what you're doing, and we are honored to get to support you in your journey. Thanks.